Along the Mississippi, before the rooster crowed and long before the bells, the sky turned the color of a split orange. Natchez woke up to the sound of wood screaming. The Crawley mansion, high on the bluff, burned like a lantern left too close to oil. Windows flashed. Rafters glowed. Smoke rose in a dark column and drifted across the river like a bad memory that finally found its voice. Neighbors ran with buckets and shouts that broke into coughing. Sparks landed on hedges and fences, then fell away like dying stars. The front door bulged and then sucked inward with a roar, as if the house had swallowed its own breath. Somewhere inside, a man pounded once, twice, then stopped. A woman's cry faded beneath the low animal thunder of flames climbing a staircase. By first light, the east side had folded. The balcony gave up its bones and dropped them into the parlor below. An oak beside the porch burned slow, like a candle that refused to be rushed. The sheriff stood with a handkerchief pressed to his face and said the word, "accident," because it fit neatly on a page. But words on paper cannot smother rumors. The servants' quarters stood empty. The kitchens were swept clean. And a thin trail of prints led down the back path toward the gullies and the reeds and the river that remembers everything it is asked to carry. By noon, people in town traded details the way gamblers trade cards. He was drunk. She was asleep. The brother tried the window. The old matron never woke. And then, spoken softer, the name that passed from porch to porch like a secret coin, Elias. They said Elias knew the house better than its owner. Knew where the beams met. Knew which stairs sang. Knew how the wind curled off the river on a moonless night and slid under doorways like a silk ribbon. They said Elias had a reason. They said he had many. The river rolled past without changing its face. The ash rose and drifted. And in the places where smoke thinned, you could see the outline of the mansion's brick chimneys like black teeth against the morning. Natchez had watched many fires. But this one felt different. This one did not look like loss. It looked like the end of a bad sentence and the start of a true one. No one said it aloud, not with the sheriff nearby and soldiers riding dusty roads, but some thoughts are too heavy to hide. An old woman in a shawl crossed herself and whispered, "Some debts are paid in coin. Others are paid in heat." And the bluff kept smoldering as if the land itself was trying to remember for once who it really belonged to. In 1859, Natchez wore wealth like a velvet coat. Cotton barges scratched the river's shine. Carriages clattered past iron fences and verandas with columns thick as tree trunks. Music spilled from parlors and soft laughter rose under chandeliers. But below the lace and lavender, another city breathed, a quieter, darker one. It lived in the fields at dawn, where fog wrapped rows of cotton like a shroud. It lived in ledger books where human lives were written in ink the same way as mules and seed. It lived in the way a whip could stop a sentence and turn it into silence. In Natchez, the rich believed power was like the river, always flowing their way. It was not. The Crawley place stood above the water, grand as a courthouse and twice as proud. People said Archer Crawley's money could paint over anything. He could gild a mirror and hide a bruise. He could throw a party and drown a rumor in wine. The house was perfect in the way a lie is perfect. Smooth, polished, and afraid of the first hard truth. In kitchens and cabins, truth had its own road. Words moved in whispers, hand to hand, safe to safe. You did not speak a name unless you trusted the room. You did not show your fear unless you wanted someone to use it. And sometimes, on the soft edge of night, you did not speak at all. You listened. Elias listened. He learned the hum of the river when wind came from the south. He learned which guards grew sleepy after a bottle. He learned how long a candle took to eat itself, and how darkness pooled in stair corners even when the moon was bright. He learned because learning is how you live when you are not allowed to own your own breath. Natchez carried its scars like the timbers of a ship, hidden beneath paint but load-bearing. Every street had a story. Every fine house had a cellar. Every fortune had a cost that never made the paper. And when the wind shifted, the city smelled like magnolia and sweat and hot iron. The river took what people threw at it. But sometimes it gave something back. On Sundays the bluff looked peaceful. Children in white, ladies in parasols, men with canes. And somewhere nearby, a hammer tapped, a plane scraped, a chisel bit into wood, shaping a cradle, a chair, a rail. Work that would be praised in the drawing room and forgotten everywhere else. Except by the hands that made it. Elias did not speak more than he had to. People said it made him proud. It made him alive. If you never show all your words, no one can use them to cut you. Before the Crawley place, he had worked on smaller farms where cabins leaned and fences sagged. His hands were steady even then. He could shave a beam smooth enough to mirror water. He could make dovetails bite so tight the joint drank air and held it. When traders brought him to Natchez, Archer Crawley saw skill and saw value. Joseph saw something else, quiet, and thought it could be bent. The first month, Elias repaired shutters and framed doorways. He replaced a rotten tread on the back stairs and memorized how the riser echoed when stepped on. He fixed a wobbly cradle in the nursery, even though the nursery had never held a child. He built a table for the dining room out of walnuts so rich it looked like melted dusk. Archer ran his palm across it and smiled as if the shine belonged to him. Elias watched and learned. He learned that Archer was loud when other men were near and quiet when he was alone. He learned that Joseph's cruelty was tidy, calculated, timed, and kept out of sight like a razor in a velvet case. He learned the old matron, Emma, could hear a lie from the hallway. He learned the young wife, Margaret, moved like someone who wanted to leave a room without opening a door. He learned something else he could not say. That some punishments were performed for show so the crowd would see power like a theater piece. And that other punishments had no audience at all. A house tells you about the people who live in it. The front rooms are the face they want the world to see. The attics, the cellars, the hidden doors, those are the true mouth, the true eyes. Elias worked everywhere. He saw where Archer hid ledgers behind a false back. He saw where Joseph stored tools that were not for wood. He saw how fear sat in corners like an extra guest no one acknowledged. There were days Elias imagined cutting one joint wrong, shaving one beam thin enough to fold. But the house would not punish the man who ordered it. The house would crush the cook, the boy who gathered kindling, the girl who carried water. Anger needs aim. Elias waited for aim. At night the mansion hushed. Servants returned to cabins and voices slid into the dark. Sometimes when called back for repairs, Elias stood in rooms that were too quiet, the kind of quiet that swallows the sound of a person's name. Those nights changed him. Not loudly. Not all at once. Like water carving rock. He kept his mind moving. He traced every hallway in his head, counted every window latch by memory, marked every floorboard that complained, every hinge that sang, every place a spark might crawl before anyone smelled it. He did not know why he remembered so much. He only knew that remembering was a door, and one day it might open. Cruelty wears masks. Archer's was gold. Joseph's was clean. Archer could be charming by daylight. He passed cigars and told jokes and flattered judges. He bragged about cotton yield and the gleam of his silver. But when the sun fell, a different man walked the corridors. He prowled. He searched for someone to be smaller than him. Anger does not need a reason. It only needs a target. Elias became that target often and not always in ways a crowd could see. Joseph's mask was order. He believed in rules the way a chemist believes in weights and measures. He recorded punishments like entries in a ledger. How long a person stood, how many minutes of sleep were taken, how many drops of water were spared. He liked pain you could not photograph. He liked fear that sat in the body for months like a cold. In a town that prized politeness, truth survives in fragments. A glance. A bruise where hands do not show. A voice that stumbles at one name but not another. Margaret wore such fragments. She avoided crowds. She lingered near windows. She wanted a child because a child can turn a house into a promise instead of a prison. When her belly finally stirred, it felt like forgiveness arriving on time. But calendars do not care who hopes. Dates and nights and locked doors lined up like beads on a string, and then the string broke. The midwives cried out when they saw the newborn's face. The doctor stared too long. Truth walked into the room and sat down on the bed. Archer raged and then went quiet, the dangerous kind of quiet that means a thought has become a plan. Joseph never raised his voice. He didn't have to. What came next moved like fog. The doctor's records were changed. The midwives were warned. The child slipped away to a cabin at the edge of the fields, placed at the breast of a woman who had milk and grief and the kind of courage that makes a person look small until you need them to be huge. Her name was Aylin. She had buried a baby in winter. She took this one and held on. Margaret disappeared into rest. Curtains closed. Doors latched. Food arrived and left untouched. Guilt can be a chain. So can love. Elias was taken to the library where the books never saved anyone. Joseph asked questions with the patience of a clock. He spoke of order, of rules, of harm, of shame. He did not ask why, because why might lead to people you were not supposed to blame. He asked who, and when, and how, because those answers can be punished. Silence is not stubbornness. Sometimes it is the only tool left when someone has taken the rest. Elias used it until Joseph decided silence had meaning, and that meaning required a lesson. The lesson left no proof that could stand up in a parlor. But bodies know what happened to them, and they remember every day. In the morning, Archer looked like a man who had convinced himself he had done something difficult and brave. Joseph looked rested. Emma walked the hallway with her mouth pressed thin, the shape a person's lips make when a story must never be told. The staff learned without being told. You can smell a new rule the way you smell rain. Elias was sold. Cheap and fast. Loaded onto a wagon before breakfast, head swimming, body breaking, mind somehow awake. Other enslaved people were made to watch, their eyes forced to swallow a message. We can do anything. And we will. But here is something men like Archer and Joseph forget. Pain teaches too. Pain teaches where a person's line is. Pain teaches what matters. Pain teaches a map, the kind you trace in your mind when your hands belong to other people. Pain taught Elias that day. It taught him to live slow and remember everything. The mansion went back to shining. Parties returned. Music covered the cracks like wallpaper. Yet in the kitchen, Melinda kept a secret ledger that did not use numbers. It used faces, who hurt, who helped, who looked away. She cooked and watched and waited. Waiting is work. And every hour of it was a brick placed on a road that led away from silence. The trader who took Elias did not ask questions that would make tomorrow difficult. Arkansas was far enough to turn a man into a rumor. On the Lambert place, work was steadier, rules clearer, and a Bible lived on the table without being used to excuse everything. Simon Lambert did not call himself kind. He simply called himself tired, tired of breaking people and pretending it made him safe. Elias healed the way a forest heals after lightning. Slowly, with black edges that never quite fade. He could not do all the work he once did, but the mind that measured rooms could still measure time. He learned where the creek ran in spring and where it hid in summer. He learned which hands on the place believed in punishment and which believed in peace. He learned how war changed the price of everything, even the value of a man's name. Rumors traveled west on the same roads as salt and letters. Natchez under Union flags, plantations wobbling like tables with a leg cut short, old owners drinking more, older rules cracking. He kept those rumors like nails in his pocket. He would need them. People saw a quiet man playing down to his grain and thought the shape they saw was the whole of him. It wasn't. Inside, something hard and simple began to grow. A vow. Not shouted. Not even spoken. A vow can live without air. It lives on memory. At night, Elias dreamed of two things, a staircase and a child. The staircase was narrow and turned at the landing, the kind the fire would like. The child's face changed as dreams do, but the eyes, those stayed. Aylin's cabin appeared like a prayer at the edge of his sleep. He woke with the taste of lamp oil in his mouth and the river's sound in his ears, though Arkansas carried different water. When Lambert freed his people before the papers made it national, some danced, some ran, some stood still like a person who has been underwater too long and needs to learn breathing again. Elias thanked him and stayed a while. Freedom without a plan can be a door that opens onto a cliff. He learned the routes no soldier wanted, the friendly attics, the church basements where old men whispered news like weather. He watched the wind for signs because wind tells you as much as maps when you are thinking about flame. And slowly, mile by mile, he turned back toward Natchez, not as a slave, not as a runaway, but as a man who would finish the sentence life had tried to leave hanging. On the last night before he left Arkansas, Elias sat alone by a dying fire. He held a small scrap of walnut he had kept since the Crawley job, the color of near night, polished by his thumb. He rolled it in his fingers and remembered how Archer had smiled when he saw the dining table. People who steal your life will still admire your work. That too went into the vow. When he rose at dawn, he left nothing of himself behind except a straightened fence post and a debt that could not be collected by mail. He walked east with the patience of winter and the purpose of summer. Travel in wartime is part courage, part luck, part choosing the right questions to ask out loud. Elias learned to be the kind of man people wanted to help. Polite, steady, grateful, quiet. He carried no papers a thief could use and no keepsake that could betray him. Only maps in his head and a list of names that lived behind his eyes. He watched soldiers change flags like seasons. He watched the price of salt climb and the price of conscience fall. He watched men who called themselves gentlemen take bread from women with empty hands. He watched deserters slip into tree lines like foxes. He watched and he remembered. In small towns he worked odd days for food and sleep. He mended a wagon wheel in exchange for the gossip of a barber who had once shaved Archer Crawley and called him the kind of man who never tips unless someone is watching. He repaired a church bench and listened to a preacher speak softly of a judgment that does not come on paper but arrives like thunder. He took those words with him, not because he needed a sermon but because sentence and storm were starting to sound the same. By the time he reached familiar trees, the roads near Natchez were heavier with soldiers and lighter with mercy. Some plantations had been emptied by debt and war. Others clung to the pretense that nothing had changed. The Crawley place still stood then, proud and dimmer. Paint flaked. Fences leaned. But cruelty was alive and well. Joseph had grown sharper with power and duller with caution. Archer drank like a man who was trying to remove a stain from the inside. Elias did not walk through the front gate. He lived in the gullies and the canebrakes where the river's breath kept the air cool and the bugs loud. He watched for a week, then two, then more. Patience is a kind of revenge too. Melinda found him first without seeing him. She hummed an old tune when she was alone, and on a still night, he hummed it back from the reeds. She turned, eyes wide, spoon still in hand, and nearly dropped the pot. He stepped from the shadow slowly, hat low, palms open. Names passed between them. Old ones, heavy ones, the kind you do not say unless you trust the dark to keep them. She told him what he needed to hear. Aylin still had the child. Joseph had started speaking of unfinished matters. Archer lived upstairs most nights because the stairs knew him better than the world did. Elias asked one question, "Can you lock the doors from inside?" Melinda nodded once. "Yes," she said. "If the house is ready to sleep. Some plans are drawings. Some are recipes." This one was a hymn with 3 notes, oil, wood, and wind. He marked the corners where beams met like crossed fingers. He marked the turn of the staircase where flame would climb like a dancer. He marked the windows that stuck if a person was nervous. He was not in a hurry. Hurry breaks things. He wanted nothing broken except the right things. Aylin listened to Melinda's whispers with her hand on the child's hair. The boy had eyes that told a story even when his mouth was full of bread. He was 4 and clever. He knew how to be quiet, how to play in the shadows, how to look away when men looked too long. She taught him a new game, hide and stay hidden until a soft whistle. He learned it in a day. Elias moved at night. He tested locks while people snored. He loosened one hinge and tightened another. He slid a sliver of wood beneath a sash so it would catch. He placed 2 stones where a door would swing and kiss them and pause. He did not want a chase. He wanted a trap. Melinda spoke to a man named Moses who had lost a son to Joseph's tidy punishments. Grief like his does not cool. It hardens. Moses did not need a speech. He needed a time. The time would be on a night when the moon was a fingernail and the air held its breath. Elias gathered what the town would sell to a man who kept his head down. Lamp oil by the jug, whale oil siphoned from a cracked barrel, strips of rag that drank kerosene, and a little gunpowder the color of old thunder. He did not buy it all in one place. He did not carry it all at once. He hid the cans where only men who know how ferns lean would think to look. He wrapped the rags and set them in a pail that once held soap. He whispered to the river the way a carpenter whispers to a beam, "Hold." 2 nights before, he led Aylin and the boy to the ravine. It was a green gash in the earth, wet and secret, with a pocket where sound went to sleep. He set bread, water, and a folded blanket. He showed the boy the shape of a small boat through the cane. He said, "If you hear the whistle, you keep your feet on this path. You do not stop for voices unless they are ours." The child nodded with the serious grace only children who have had to grow fast possess. Melinda rehearsed her part the way a singer does, quiet and exact. When Archer drank deep, she would check the shutters and slide the sticks into place. When Joseph rode his night rounds, she would latch what he left open. She had a key for a door that wasn't supposed to lock. A servant learns where keys hide because survival is a craft. Moses gathered 3 men and then let 2 of them go. Too many hands make noise. He chose one steady heart to stand in the yard with a length of rope and a prayer that did not ask for forgiveness. On the day of, Elias slept at noon wrapped in the river's cool breath. He woke at dusk and listened to the insects. They hissed summer into the trees. He watched the house turn on its lamps one by one, as if the mansion was counting down without knowing it. Archer's window lit late. Joseph's went dark on time. Elias tipped the first oil where a column met the porch, where wood had been painted a dozen times and could not drink any more lies. He traced a line along the baseboard of the back hall, where drafts played and mice lived. He drenched the foot of the stairs, then paused and touched the banister he had once polished. Hands remember. He pulled his own away. He lit one rag and walked. The flame licked and then leaned and then learned to run. Fire speaks many languages. In a kitchen it hums. In a hearth it sighs. In a dry summer house fed with oil it roars. The first tongue of flame tasted paint and smiled. The second climbed past nails and bit into old pine. In the back hall behind the pantry heat ballooned the air and the door grew warm like a fevered cheek. Melinda felt it and stepped away, her part done, her breath fast but quiet. She walked to the yard, put her hands in her apron, and looked at the stars as if she were measuring the weather. Inside, a lamp flickered as heat found it and pushed it toward shatter. The staircase took the fire like a wick. It had been dusted and polished and praised for years. Now it became a ladder the flames could climb. By the time Archer woke, smoke had already settled in the room like a heavy guest. He coughed once, twice, reached for the wall, found it hot, and turned toward the door that would not open. He pounded, then called for Joseph, then for anyone. The wood answered with crackle. The smoke with a hush. On the far side of the house, a window squealed. Joseph's shape cut the lamplight. He smelled the first gulp of burning and started toward the stair, then stopped. Calculation hates surprises. He took 3 steps back into his room and reached for a ledger he could not leave and for a pistol he could not aim through smoke. He made for the second-floor window, put shoulder to frame and drove it wide enough to meet night. He jumped. He landed badly, breath torn out, ankle twisted, dignity shattered the way only the ground can shatter it. He rolled and rose and turned toward the door. Lock. He went to the next. Lock. He limped to the back, eyes stinging, mind working, and a figure stepped from the dark, the kind of slow step a man takes when he wants another man to know he has arrived exactly on time. Moses said nothing. He swung once. A rope does not make a loud sound when it moves through air. It makes a promise. Joseph stumbled, surprised that the world could be this quiet when he had spent years filling it with careful pain. He reached for the pistol. The second swing convinced him to let go. The third taught him about the weight of other people's anger when they are finally allowed to lift it. In the yard, a circle formed. Not a mob. A memory. The same faces Joseph had counted and priced and punished counted his breaths now. None of them were many. On the porch, heat blew out the glass and sent a brief storm of bright shards across the steps. The parlor curtains whooshed and became black lace in seconds. Upstairs, Archer staggered to the balcony that was no longer there and stared into a night full of red wings. He called for his mother, for his brother, for anyone who would run into flames for him the way he had demanded others run into cold. The house answered by dropping a ceiling beam into the hallway behind him. Emma, old and small, slept with a prayer folded under her pillow. Smoke curled beneath her door and smoothed the lines on her face. Some endings arrive like anger. Hers arrived like a quilt. The neighbors came running with buckets and alarm. They found the front a furnace and the side a wall of heat that pushed them backward no matter how brave they wanted to be. The sheriff shouted orders he barely believed in. Men who had eaten Archer's bread watched his house turn to cinder and felt the awkward ache that comes when a truth is too bright to look at directly. Behind the shrubbery, Melinda stood near the fig tree with her hands still. She did not smile. Justice can be a terrible, holy thing. It is not for grinning. She counted to 50 under her breath and then one more for good measure. When she reached the final number, she gave the soft whistle that turns a game into a journey. In the ravine, Aylin gathered the blanket and the boy. They moved like rabbits through brush. When they reached the water, a small boat waited in weeds where frogs sang. Elias appeared as if the boat had made him. He lifted the child, met Aylin's eyes, and for the first time in years let his face show something tender and unbroken. Then he bent to the oars. They slid along a black stripe of river that glowed where the fire wrote itself upon it. The current pulled. The night breathed. On the bluff, the mansion sagged into itself like a lyre caught mid-sentence. A final beam fell, a throat of flame rose, and then the roof dropped with a sound like truth slamming a door. By dawn there were 3 bodies to count, though no one counted them out loud. The law sketched lines in ash and called them facts. The word accident was spoken and written and repeated until it fit inside the sheriff's hat. The neighbors nodded because nodding is easier than remembering what you saw. But some witnesses do not forget. Trees, stones, rivers, and people who were told all their lives to keep quiet and keep still. Those people remember like iron. The day after, the bluff wore gray. Men walked it with handkerchiefs to their faces. Women whispered recipes for sorrow and promised to bring pies. Someone tacked up black crepe that wouldn't stay, because the breeze kept lifting it as if the air itself were unwilling to mourn. Word spread faster than smoke. Aylin and the boy were gone. Melinda was nowhere to be found, if you asked the sheriff, and resting, if you asked anyone who had ever eaten her bread. Moses and the others drifted north by 2s and 3s, blending into wagon tracks and depot crowds, names changing like shirts. Downriver, a skiff moved when the fog did. Elias kept close to the reeds and the quiet banks where turtles slid and no one asked questions. He left the boat where a trader would be paid to forget and took the road like a man with a cousin in the next county. The child rode on his shoulders sometimes, small hands in his hair, eyes wide at everything the world promised when it did not have a whip in its hand. Official papers said tragic blaze. Unofficial mouths said fitting. At the market, an old man spat and said he had seen Archer cheat a widow on a bale and that the Lord has a long arm. A preacher said little, which told you more than a sermon. The sheriff shuffled his feet and told a story about a knocked-over lamp he did not believe. The judge signed what he had to. War still needed signatures and grief did not. The Crawley land went to seed. Fences fell like tired men. Weeds knelt and then stood and then strangled. A buyer came with coin and found the ground too heavy to plow. He sold it at a loss a year later. Some places do not want to be cleaned. Some places want to be left alone. Years after, children dared each other to walk the bluff at dusk. They swore the wind there smelled like lamp oil, and that sometimes a staircase creaked where no house stood. They threw stones and listened for windows that would never break again. And in certain kitchens on certain nights, older women poured coffee and said the name Elias the way you say a psalm. The river never told. It carried the last ash away and made of it something new. People with money believe money is a wall. But ash drifts over walls. People with power believe power is a river. But rivers change course. The Crawley mansion is a memory now, columns gone, bricks scattered, ironwork sleeping under vines. If you stand on the bluff, you can still hear a high sound when the wind is mean, the kind stairs make when they are being asked to carry more than they should. If you close your eyes, you can feel heat. It isn't there, not really. It's in the mind. The mind remembers what the body will not let it forget. Justice did not come to Natchez on a horse with a trumpet. It came on a hot night with a can of oil and the steady hands of a man who once built a table no one would let him sit at. It came in the hush of a kitchen where a woman slid a latch and never asked for applause. It came in a ravine where another woman wrapped a child and chose courage instead of sleep. It came in the yard where a rope's swing finally traced a circle around a man who thought circles were only for his kind. You can call it revenge. Many do. But words like that are tidy. They fold a great storm into a little box. What happened on the bluff was larger. A debt collected, a balance restored, a house learning it could not keep secrets forever. And for those who say the law was not served, ask them this. Who wrote the law? And for whom? The story spreads still, not loud, not official, but sure. It moves in kitchens and in the slow way people touch a banister before they climb. It moves in the way a man lights a lamp and sets it far from the curtains. It moves in the way a mother looks at her child and promises, without words, that the world will not take him easily. If you ever walk that ground at evening, take off your hat. Speak softly. Houses remember the hands that built them. Wood remembers the plane. Fire remembers the match. And a name, spoken true, can cross a century like a bridge. Elias, Melinda, Alan, the boy. They walked away from the blaze and into a life no ledger could hold. The bluff keeps its smoke. The river keeps its current. And the ashes keep their lesson. When cruelty builds a home on stolen breath, do not be surprised when the breath returns as wind. If this true feeling tale of hidden history moved you, tell me where you're watching from. Share it with someone who thinks old houses are only wood and paint. And if you want more stories that peel back the velvet and show the scars beneath, you know what to do.